Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about whether Fallout was destined to happen or the result of massive preparation. This came from a conversation I had with Matt Baum in his podcast, The Sewers of Paris. I will link it below. It's a really good podcast, and I'm a fan of Matt's YouTube channel because he talks a lot about LGBT representation in books and movies and TV shows way long time ago and back. I mean, he does modern day, but he goes really far back and shows how there were always gay people working in a lot of the movies and TV shows that you liked. And what was interesting is we talked about how I got into the video game industry, specifically how I got into D&D and then how I got into gaming. And he just threw out a comment going, wow, it seemed like you were destined to make games when I described everything that had happened. And my response was it destiny or was I perfectly prepared and poised to take advantage of any opportunity that came my way? So I thought, you know what we'll do? I'm going to line up the events that led to Fallout and you can decide. By the way, there's going to be a lot of links on this video that's in the description. The links are in the description. I trimmed them down because if I was including a link that was linked by something I was linking to, I took it out. Otherwise, there'd be like 24 links down there. And there's a link to the podcast if you want to listen to it, my podcast with Matt Baum. So let's look at all the events that led up to Fallout. And it was interesting because talking with him made it all like clarify in my head. So I've talked about how I learned Dungeons and Dragons because my mom worked at the Judge Advocate General's office. And the captains and admirals in that office, because it was a division of the Navy, were playing a game she thought I'd like. That turned out to be D&D. I loved it so much. I went and played with some of them on the weekend. It was so fun. When my mom and I drove home, she got me the books. At the exact same time, this was when I was like 13 or 14. The same time, right when I started high school at 14, my high school got computers. They got Atari 800s. They could have gotten Apple IIs, they could have gotten IBM PCs, but they got Atari 800s. So I would sit and try to figure out how to code them. My sister had just taken a college class in programming, and the textbook was just lying around the house. So between that textbook and me spending many, many hours after hours at school, my freshman and sophomore year, and this is like I was 14 or 15, and I was staying at after school 2 hours, 4 hours, one time 6 hours. Yeah, it was like 8 or 9 p.m. I came home and I got a talking to from my mom. I would just stay there and code. I mean, the janitors would come in, clean around me, tell me goodnight, turn off all the lights except the one above my workstation, and they'd leave. And I'd have to go out this set of fire doors that were the only way to get out after everything was locked up. But because of the D&D and because of learning how to code, when I turned 16, or right before I turned 16, when that opportunity came up for me to work at a game job in Virginia, I was ready for it. I showed up. They asked me questions about the Atari 800, asked me to put together a simple program in front of them, and I did it. In fact, I used an extended graphics mode that their programmer didn't know about. And I'm like, oh, this is how you get rid of the window at the bottom. We don't need a text window. Boom, it's gone. I got that game dev job. I was 16, worked there for about the next 4 years, so the rest of high school and into college. That game job paid for my college. We didn't have a lot of money. My mom was concerned about how she was going to have me and my brother in college at the same time. Well, I made a lot of money at that game development job, and that helped pay for my college. So I went to UVA and got an engineering degree in computer science, which led to me getting a full scholarship at UCI, University of California, Irvine, in Southern California. So I moved there and I'm working on AI. I got my master's in 89. I was working on my PhD, but I was surrounded by game companies. And in the evening, I'd often play tabletop RPGs with grad school friends of mine because we didn't have any money. So we couldn't go do anything. So we were kind of stuck in the student housing there. So we played a lot of games, including GURPS, which is where I learned it, where I played a ton of it. That became important later. Not right away, though, because when I decided finally I wanted to leave grad school, I sent my resume to Interplay because they were about 10 miles from where I lived. They hired me as a contractor because they asked me if I knew THACO. And I knew there were two, down to me and another programmer, and we were both about equal in coding skill. But not only could I tell them what THACO meant for, 2-hit armor class 0, I then asked them if they wanted the values for THACO for each of the 4 major D&D classes, fighter, magic user, thief, cleric, at level 1. If they wanted the THACO at level 1 for each of those. And they said yes, and I told them the numbers, and I was right, and I got the job. Almost as soon as I started working there, I started doing an evening tabletop play. Same thing I did in grad school, where people could come to the conference room at night, and we'd play tabletop games. And we played D&D and Torg and GURPS. It's very important about GURPS because so many of us got into playing GURPS because it's got so many different settings you can use. We didn't just do fantasy GURPS. We did superhero GURPS and high-tech GURPS and sci-fi GURPS and horror GURPS. We did a GURPS everything and a GURPS nothing. I started making apps to support us. I made a GURPS character generator, a GURPS star system generator. I've got a video on that. So I started making these GURPS apps to help us play. They would generate characters or star systems. One of the other interplayers made a vehicle design app. At the same time, because I had finished the game I was hired to do, which was a business sim called Rags to Riches, I was doing installers for other games, and in my spare time I was making engines. Why? I just wanted to. Back then, you couldn't learn things by going on YouTube or any other website and having someone show you exactly what to do, and there were no game engines. So I decided to make my own because you learned by doing. Around then, maybe 93, 94, Interplay wanted a new license. They wanted to make a licensed RPG. The discussion boiled down to GURPS and Earth Dawn. GURPS won. And I think part of the reason GURPS won is it wasn't just me pushing forward. It was all those people I played GURPS with at night. And we already had these apps, which I pointed out had underlying code that would already jumpstart us into making a GURPS game. So we GURPS won, started making a GURPS game. That's the one I got put in charge of, and that's the one that became Fallout. So if you look at these events that led to Fallout being made, it's interesting that any single one of those events, if any single one of those events had not happened, if I hadn't gotten into D&D, if my high school hadn't gotten Atari 800s and I hadn't learned them because my sister had a college textbook on programming that I could use, and I didn't get that Gamedev job, and I hadn't gone to college and then gotten a scholarship to come to California. I mean, nothing but a full scholarship could have allowed me to afford to come to California. Any one of those events didn't happen, there'd be no Fallout. So when you put it like that, it certainly seems like destiny. It seems like fate played a hand in getting Fallout made because everything had to occur just so to lead to that moment. But there's another way to look at this, and that's everything that happens has causes and precedents. That's why they happen. I mean, how do I know this? Because things that don't have causes don't happen. That's how we know things happen. So we got Fallout because all those things happened. And if none of those things had happened, we wouldn't know we didn't have Fallout. We wouldn't be talking about not having Fallout. And it's weird because when I know what people are thinking when they talk about fate or destiny, and there's a bit of superstition in there, but it also sounds like it belittles the amount of work that went in to make those events happen. A lot of what I did as a teenager and in college and in grad school was preparing for a moment where if someone said, could you make an RPG? I was ready. I had played a ton of tabletop. I knew how to code. I knew how to get groups interested in storylines. My adventures always had these interesting themes to it. It's where dumb dialogue came from. But it wasn't just me. Everybody who worked on Fallout had put an enormous amount of work in getting there. Like I said, you couldn't go online and learn how to make a computer game. So everybody who was at Interplay in the 90s had scraped and scratched their way into learning how to make games by buying highly mathematical books at SciTech bookstore because that was the only way you could learn how to do some obtuse graphics that we had to do back then. Or learning how interrupts worked and how sound cards worked, and the artist would try to make things on restricted color palettes at restricted resolutions, and how color cycling worked. You had to learn all those things on your own, and no one would show you. You had to learn. You had to do it and learn it. And the point I want to make there is everybody had prepared really hard for a moment like the one that came along to make Fallout. We weren't all just sitting in a room waiting for someone to beg us to make a game. We were preparing ourselves. We wanted to do something. It's like I've said, some people have the Great American Novel. Some people wanted to make a movie. Everybody there who worked on Fallout really wanted to make a video game of a particular kind. And they had these ideas and they were bursting out of them. And we had done so much to be ready for that moment that we actually started making Fallout before there was any kind of permission to make Fallout. We were getting together and talking about making a game before we really were assigned to make a game. Here's another way you might want to think about it. Because we did that, because we made Fallout, how do you know that something better than Fallout wasn't made because of all those events that happened? Remember, Interplay was looking at Earth Dawn as well. Maybe we didn't get some amazing Earth Dawn RPG in the 90s that was so awesome and sold millions of units, and it saved Interplay. And today, Interplay would be the big RPG developer of the world. We don't know that. Who knows what happened? All I know is all the other things happened, and we made Fallout. Again, it sounds like destiny. I think it's careful and methodical preparation. But you've heard everything I've talked about today. So do you think it's destiny or do you think it's preparation? You get to choose.